I think he needs to go see a counselor.
Okay.
I would
Yeah.
recommend an educational class.
So
where
education.
He's a little confused.
Okay.
Send him to a class on
Mhm.
diversity training or something like that.
Darcy?
Yeah, that's what some of our group decided too, was retraining, counseling, and getting the knowledge that this person is a human being, not just classified as their color. And that's what I think. Yeah.
They're human beings.
I thought of an example when I worked in the hospital, in the emergency room in the hospital, and a Hispanic woman would come in who's suffered spousal abuse or something, and they would just call her, they'd have a nickname for the hysteric. And again, that's as racist. And yet I just swallowed it and said, oh, that's not appropriate, but didn't say anything.
I wanted to ask Greg, is it a policy? Because you said it is a violation of policy. Well, hopefully it is, but how many police departments have a policy that would make it a violation of a policy? What kind of policy? How would it be stated?
Right.
To say that that's even a policy, is it stereotyping or was it a derogatory remark? I mean, how would you write a policy that then you could say you just violated policy?
Right. I'll be right. That's a very, very good point, David. And we're going to get to that. So very, very good questions and comments. Neil?
I'll relate. This is a personal experience. I told it in the breakout room, but I'd worked with a guy since the year 2000, and this was 2008. And he said, of course, Obama was being run for re-election. And I worked for county government in a tri-city area, or tri-county area in Portland. And he made the comment, well, I wouldn't vote for him because he's black. And I just turned around and walked away. Bear in mind, my issue is that I've been going through diversity training since the year 2000. 8 years of it. Every year, you recognize what those things were. But I didn't do anything about it because, in effect, I had to work with him every day, 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. So how do you upset a relationship like that in a graceful way? I agree. To go to counseling, but how do you report him to get him to go to counseling without destroying a working relationship?
Yeah, that's good.
There's that brotherhood,
right?
Officers, and also that's probably another subject too, but the police unions that they know are going to protect them.
Yeah, there's unions and there's the thin blue line is what it's called there, Jill. That's what you're referring to, is that culture in policing about, you need to be on
Don't rat on each other.
Yeah, exactly. Because when it's dangerous work and you want people to be when you call them to be backup, you've got something going on, you want them to come and you want them to come and help you out right away and not be like the one that ratted me. So there is that internal pressure and culture. Robert.
I was just thinking, as new things on the internet, Karen, a lot of women are being called Karens now. And I just realized through this, we're starting a new one and maybe we should stop.
It would be a good thing not to, discontinue disrespecting women and all people, but women seem to get a lot of it.
Most of the Karens are pretty obnoxious, but on the other hand, it would be so easy to stereotype any woman that raises her voice and gets called a Karen because she's speaking up.
And you hear that more and more, I think, to Robert's point, and people referencing, well, she's just a Karen, or don't be a Karen. And remember back to our last week's discussion and what we talked and learned about with intersectionality. That deals with gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, culture, a lot of different intersections that we all have. And you kind of violate that spirit of that, don't we? If we start calling people names.
Mm-hmm.
What does Karen mean? Where does that come from?
Insensitive.
It's on the internet. It's on the internet right now. If you look on YouTube and just bring up Karen, it'll show you a lot of examples.
Yeah.
I think
So
think
why
it was a
would
Saturday
anyone
night-
bother to do that?
I think it was a Saturday night skit or something, wasn't it?
Okay, all right. Well,
Well, it has a lot to do. It has a lot to do with people calling the police on Black people for barbecuing in public or selling water or different things, and they're calling these people that are calling the police on people Karens, or they have a male name for that too, but
Yeah.
I'll
Basically
not try to
exerting white
propagate
privilege
this.
in an,
Mhm.
in an inappropriate way. Well, there's probably no appropriate way, but it's just,
One thing that came up, I think Connie brought up that when this happens, I'll speak for you, Connie. She said that when something like that happens, rather than saying you're a racist, she would say, now, why would you phrase it that way? And make them say, oh, well, because, force them to confront what they said, and then they could say, well, I meant nothing by it or whatever. But then you're not being aggressive to them by saying you're a racist, which is, I've got to be careful I don't do that, because I did that once to a guy. Oh, you just made a racist comment, and of course then our discussion ended and it never went anywhere. But if you say, now, why would you phrase it that way?
Yeah, that's right.
That's I'm gonna have to start using that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just a segment on how we.
I find it interesting how people that often you see, at least on the media, like on TV shows, as being able to joke around with each other, guys, oh, you fat slob, oh, blah, 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 blah. But then as soon as you say racist, it's like something in the air, and people that are so, that's a word that can so insult people that are doing the insulting. I mean, we have to keep in mind that when we say, when we call out racism, I mean, it's almost gaslighting. You call out racism, and then you're afraid that you've hurt the feelings of someone who's just being a jerk. And if you say you're being a jerk, they'd probably take it better than you being a racist.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jackie says I would avoid starting the question with why. Thank you, Jackie. Laura?
How about using the word what? What did you mean by that? Would that work?
Mhm. Yeah, it might. It seems like they'd realize then too of what they said and maybe think, oh my gosh, why did I say that?
Right.
Yeah,
You could just say, what are you
I think-
insinuating?
yeah.
I'm going to put this in the chat, but the chat is not working, so I'm just going to jump right in. This is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
When parents ask, or when teachers ask a kid,
Oh,
Loser?
go ahead, Carol. We've
I
lost.
think we lost her.
Laura, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wonder, like if the goal is to like shut it down, like if you want to do a boom, then you label it, right? If the goal is to problematize it and like bring it into dialogue, I wonder about the kind of statements we use when we're trying to engage in dialogue and conflict, where you say something like, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't remember that there was anyone by that name. Or
Yeah.
in fact, I think that might come from a book from like 1976.
Yeah.
So what you're raising it, but you're not labeling, and then you're not like shutting down, but you're speaking from an I perspective, or I'm not comfortable with that. something like that, I think could open the conversation. And then, because ultimately what you want to do is you don't want to have a policy that if you call anybody by a name that's the wrong name, you'll be censured. You know what I mean? Like, that's not going to work. But you want to have a culture where we speak respectfully about the people we are serving as officers of the law, right? So like, how do you build a culture like that? By behaving that way, by being respectful of the other person.
I also have sort of a differing thought to that, Laura, is it seems like if we want to change it, we need to name it. And so I feel like it's important to name it somehow, and maybe find a less confrontational way to do it. But I'm afraid that people won't pick up on what you're trying to get at unless you name it.
Right.
And I think starting off with that makes me feel uncomfortable is a good way to broach the subject. But I think it needs to be named, or they're not figured out.
You know, one of the things they always say in personnel management is that if you fire somebody, you want to make sure they know they're fired so they don't show up at work the next day. And I think what Galen is saying is along those lines, that if you've got something you're calling somebody on, no matter how you do it, and you want to make sure they know you have, and they don't show up for work the next day.
So speaking of that, Robert, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I'm not sure that, I hate to bring this name up, but Trump kept saying that he wasn't a racist, and he was proven by all the Black people that he had in his group. I mean, I think racist is maybe too large of a term. Maybe it needs to be brought down to the feelings. How did that make you feel? Or that makes, like she said, I forget who that was, that that makes me feel uncomfortable. But maybe the person needs to realize what their effect was on that person. Like, do you want to be called Barney? Because a Barney is kind of a white person. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a stereotypical, could just call him John Doe, I suppose, but now I'm rambling. Please go on.
So let me ask you a question. What should there be discipline for this officer? Should there, you are one of 4, you're all officers. Do you just let it go? Do you have an obligation to report it to management? Is the one question. The second, if it gets reported to management, should the officer be disciplined? And then the range of discipline for you is reprimand, suspension, or dismissal.
What did he say again? What was the offense?
Well, I think that depends on the policy, Greg, and how it's worded. I retired a couple of years ago from the sheriff's office, and we had policies around things like this, but I can't remember how they're worded. I think it was couched more in terms of respect, being respectful to people, and non-aggressive and stuff like that. And it wasn't specifically about racism that I recall.
Should there be?
This still might be in the realm of ignorance. He might be ignorant that he is making a racist comment. Okay. So I think counseling would be best, and I think someone needs to talk to his superior.
Okay, so it should be reported.
Yes.
Robert, how about you, Martin?
I think there's a lot of possibilities, obviously, and context always matters. In my experience, it's really difficult to change people's hearts and minds, but you can change behavior in systems. And that has to be top down. You have to have the right people running the organization. You have to have the appropriate set of policies. You need to model behavior. And then you need to be committed. Maybe this person, I mean, we're projecting a lot from one comment. that maybe this person should not be in law enforcement at all. You know, we should be recruiting people who treat each person they deal with, whether on the blue side or on the civilian side, with respect. And, you know, that's not something that happens overnight. You need to build the system around those principles and reinforce them.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, where was this and what happened? Not far.
Okay.
When did it
Somebody
happen?
called
It
a black
spring.
man had arrested a couple nights ago, Kunti Kanta.
Among a group of officers. They had to go to the hospital, arrest him as a trespass. And then a few days later, the 4 officers involved in that arrest were talking while they were waiting to get lunch or dinner. And the one said, "Hey, do you remember the Kunta Kinte we arrested the other day?" And then another said, "That's racist." And then the one who said it walked away. And so that's kind of the genesis. Here's their policy. Now, keep in mind, in Seattle police, they're under a consent decree, a federal consent decree, which means that's a fancy term to say it's a negotiation. It's an agreement based on a past practice that the federal government determined they had relative to bias policing, excessive force. They had some problems with their policing practice. So the U.S. government went in and worked with them to do training and to get rid of those issues and problems. And one of those, I would assume, is this policy here. It's effective 8/1 of 2019. They've been under a consent decree
There's no way.
2012.
Greg, can you enlarge that?
Sure, let me see if I can. I can't. It's on a slide. But
I will put that, I will send that out to everyone later.
it would be great for you to read the policy. It sounds like there's a lot of interest in this. What does it say? It's pretty expansive. And it's called bias-free policing. So that is a good thing. That is a good change in what we're talking about. And the fact that it is on the books and that they're taking this part seriously. They, again, had problems with policing. Don't forget our Portland Police Bureau in Portland also is under a consent decree for similar but different issues. And the Seattle police had actually written to the U.S. Department of Justice back in the spring of last year saying, I think we're done. I think we've fulfilled just about everything. And then the riots happened and they had all that public concern about how they were policing the protests. And so they said, we'll rescind our request to be over with. We'll continue under the consent decree for a while. And so it continues. What happened to the officer? They fired him. Now, a couple things to think about in this case. And I say silver lining of hope and change in that bias-free policing is a good policy and they have it on the books. The fact that internally in that culture that fellow officers turned him in for making the racial slur is dramatic.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. And so the fact they did. Now, I think if you read the policy, you will see that there's an obligation for if you see something, you got to say something. But remember George Floyd, 3 officers standing by as another officer murdered that man.
Why didn't they pull that guy off? Why wasn't Floyd? I mean,
exactly. Well, that's to my point, is that if you see something, do something, say something. And that's, that's an issue for police to have to confront, is that you've got to have a culture that it's okay to, if you see something, do something, say something. These officers, the 3 that overheard the slur, they didn't report it right away. It took a few days. And I imagine that was their coming to reckoning, perhaps, about like, what do we do with this? If we don't report, though, we could stand to be disciplined ourselves. And remember, they're under a consent decree, so they're elevated at a higher level, probably, of sensitivity.
Greg, what does consent decree mean?
It's a negotiated settlement between the federal government and the local government regarding how are you going to do your policing in the 21st century. So basically it's a term that means agreement, settlement.
Court.
Yeah, settlement. And it lists in fine detail the deficiencies that were found by a federal Department of Justice investigation into the patterns and practice of your policing. And they found serious problems wrong with the way they were handling use of force, bias in who they selected to enforce and police, and a few other items. Portland Police, again, has the same similar type of a consent decree as well. And again, it dealt with use of force, how they treated mentally ill in that case, not having adequate training, understanding of how to treat and respond to people that are having a mental crisis. And so.
Bill, this is Deanna.
Yes. Somebody going to say something there?
No, I think it was just background.
Okay.
Greg, I'm wondering, you know, you've mentioned these agreements like with the Seattle Police Department, and there were under the Voting Rights Act, there were agreements with or orders from the federal government about how states would conduct elections, and those they let them expire. And I wonder how many areas there are. Now there's 2, police, elections. I wonder how many other areas there are where the federal government can step in, or where there can be some kind of an agreement. That might be something good for us to know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Fred. Bobby?
Bobby, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I think in Seattle, what you're bringing up, it still has to be part of the culture. I still believe it's a top-down thing where, like it says, that a fish thinks from the head.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I would guess, since we're doing a lot of guessing in this whole scenario, is that it was made known that this was important and this needed to be done, and yes, you all are going to comply with this. We're all going to do this together, or we're going to be in, this is the way we're going to go forward from the top down, because other places, the governor or someone has said, you need to do this, and the police have said, nah, we don't want to do it, or they'll say yes, and still within the group they'll go, nah, it's not important. So I think it's all has to do with not just what's put on paper, but the culture. And that often starts with the top down in saying, we will be respectful of people. We're going to follow this. This is important.
Yes.
And so it becomes the culture of the place.
Agreed.
One indication of that, I think, is that I hope someone's following the career of the careers of the officers who turned this guy in to see how they fare in that organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, they wouldn't fare very well.
Yeah.
Another concept I was thinking was that Kunta Kinte came out, Roots came out in the 70s, I believe. Mm-hmm. So this, to know this phrase as it come to mind first thing, you would have to be kind of old and in the police system for a long time. So this seems like it would be kind of deep into his psyche.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of goes along with
that worries me.
Yeah, I was thinking sort of the same thing, in that it seems like firing him, if this is a first offense, if this is a young officer, didn't it say he'd been there 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
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 So I wonder if when they got to investigating that, they found more instances of him being racist and disrespectful and insensitive and stuff like that. If there was more that came up,
Right.
it seems like one time.
Pretty harsh.
Pretty harsh, yeah. Oh, definitely, he needed some education and counseling around that. It definitely should not be ignored, but that did seem a little harsh. So there must have been some extenuating circumstances.
I think we have Darcy, Jackie, and Neil. Darcy, you're muted.
Darcy, you need to unmute yourself.
Uh-oh.
My hand was raised accidentally, so I really don't have anything to say right now.
Jackie, did you want to maybe jump in there while Darcy gets her unmute?
Is she on computer?
She's on a tablet, so Jackie.
Oh, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
I was listening and I'm thinking that the goal is to sensitize people to the way they think. You can't change a person's heart by labeling their actions. And so to immediately say that's racist is sort of it's kind of like a cowardly thing to do because it shuts down everything. When you say that's racist. And so as Laura was saying, to kind of ramp up rather than just immediately attack, say that was, that made me uncomfortable. And then person would ask why. And you say, well, really, if you think about it, it's insensitive and it, depending on who's listening would think that's a racist statement and then have a conversation because the goal is to sensitize the person to their way of thinking. You figure if you've been swimming in the water of racism all your life, as all of us have been, and in the culture that you're in, to say something like Kunta Kinte and think it was clearly if it's a young officer, you had to hear it somewhere. Now, maybe from his upbringing, but probably from fellow officers.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
So, yeah. And so all those people who were part of the Capitol uprising, who lost their jobs, to me, you quit after you let things happen, but nothing's changed in you. Nothing had, what I mean? The goal is to eventually help someone to examine the way they think and to hopefully down the road change their heart. But to just cut people off, to me, all that does is, it's just like if we cut off, everybody says, shut down Trump. So you shut him down, but really you're leaving him to just grow like a cancer, hidden away. You know what I'm saying? And so I would rather have the person know that what they're saying is not acceptable and help the person to develop, as fellow officers become more sensitized. But to push those people out, all you're doing is creating a subculture of angry people who, Trump unearthed.
Right.
Those people who, the QAnon people, all those people were there all along. Trump just gave them a voice. Right. And so when you shut people down, you really are just putting them underground to grow and become festering cancers.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie.
Darcy.
I finally got unmuted.
Yeah.
What I was thinking about was the officer being fired. I think that was good and bad. I mean, this show the policy's working, but what about his upbringing, his family life, his parents, what kind of environment he had lived in? And I used to work with special need kids. So you go back to the root of their lifestyle and find out what's causing the problem. and how to interact with them. And it starts with the parents, it even goes back to the grandparents and the aunts, the uncles, or whatever. And I think this as a whole is really good because we need to reach out to all walks of life to figure out what's going on and why there's so much hate and discretion like that against blacks and Hispanics and Indian. I mean, whatever race you are, I mean, we're all one. Like I always said, if you peeled off the first layer of our skin, we're all the same color, you know, and it's just hard that way. When my son was growing up, we always had a saying in our house, he could never use the word hate. And I said, I just do not like that word. I said, you can use the word I do not care for, or I'm unable to do it. I don't want to do it. And you don't hate anything. And he taught that to his sons and his daughter. And it makes me feel so much better because none of them say, I hate this, I hate that. I mean, that's such a harsh word. And to eliminate it out of our vocabulary would be wonderful. I mean, it'd be so much more enjoyable to say, I really don't know how to do it or I can't do it. I mean, it sounds nicer. So that's my spiel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad you're able to come off of mute there. Let me move us down the field a little more and kind of pivot to a new topic. And I'm going to launch a poll for you. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
How should race, ethnicity, and culture be viewed in our everyday lives? Should we treat everyone the same, assume colorblindness, or should we recognize the ethnic differences in people? This is an anonymous poll, so if you could just put in what your feeling is on that. And we're going to use that as a bridge to the next topic.
Okay.
62% have voted.
Have voted.
Have polled. 75% have polled. Thinking that's probably going to be about it because Fred, Lori, and I are not voting.
Janice has a question. Janice, unmute yourself.
I'm not sure how to vote.
Are you on a tablet?
Yeah.
Does it have a button for you to select one of the two?
I didn't see it.
Tap your screen.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
We'll
Just tap your screen.
forget it. Share screen.
Just tap it.
Oh. Poll in progress.
I wanted to ask too, is this particular racial slur, is it in the dictionary? Some of them end up there, and that's a place where they're identified as such. But I don't, is it a K that this one starts with? I don't see it.
Oh, you're talking about the name that they called the young man?
Right, or whatever it was that got him in trouble.
He referred to the young man as Kunta Kinte.
Yeah, I've got this, and so would that end up here at some point in the future? Or?
Probably not.
The movie Roots.
Kunta Kinte was the name of the character in that Alex Haley book.
Called Roots.
Yeah.
That name wouldn't be in the dictionary.
It's not a slur by itself. It's a reference to an African American who I think, if you, at least my memory serves me, when that was popular in the media, the sound bites you heard were him saying his name. I'm Kunta Kinte.
Right.
I mean, it was part of the sound bite. So it's interesting, a 3-year officer, unless he was older. But okay, moving on to our poll. I don't know, Janice, were you able to?
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay. All right, here we go. This is good news. I'm going to share the results with you. There you go. 100%. We should recognize the ethnic differences in people. That is excellent. I have done this poll in 2 classes this week, and about 75 to 85% of people say we should treat everyone the same. And
Really?
essentially assume, and these are criminal justice students, by the way, that took the poll. And although they're not in a racial awareness class or discussion group like we are, so this is actually very good because it demonstrates that you all believe that in our day-to-day world, we should be looking at people's differences and not just be, I mean, looking at trying to be colorblind. Hold on a second. Somebody wanted to check both boxes. Everyone should be treated the same and cultural differences should be respected. And that is true. So, I mean, I think that deserves a little comment, is that we want to treat people the same, but we can't be colorblind. Because the reality is your brain does not allow you to not see color and see someone's differences. I say peanut butter, you just thought jelly. I mean,
it can be subtle. I mean,
it's very, very, yeah. And it's just, so you're asking yourself to do something that's not really possible.
Well, it is, I mean, but I was sensitized to this by listening to Diane Akiyama speak. She's the first Japanese American person ever to be ordained a priest in the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
And she's going to be ordained as the 11th Bishop of Oregon this Saturday. She is married to a Black man. And initially, and she related a story about how a cultural clash. In the Japanese culture, you don't overspeak. I mean, we all, it's very typical in our culture or in his Black culture to use verbal reinforcement. Somebody said something, and if you agree, you essentially interrupt by saying, you're right, or something like that. Apparently in the Japanese culture or in her family, that was considered very rude behavior. He didn't know. So, I mean, was he wrong? No, but he could have made his in-laws less uncomfortable by understanding and appreciating their cultural norms.
Right, correct. And I like the way you said that, Martin, appreciate and understand. And I think that's, we want to appreciate, well, actually we want to recognize, appreciate, and understand the differences that we all have. It's a more rich, satisfying life. So colorblindness, though, is what we, you know, you hear people, and I see a lot. I just want to be, I'll enforce the law by just treating everybody the same. You know, I won't see in color at all because that's the safest way to be. I don't want to, you know, the spirit of what I'm saying is good in that I want to treat everybody the same. I don't want to treat anybody differently because of their color, their skin.
Doesn't work if you treat everybody badly.
Right. Right. Colorblindness is judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin, right? And then, but the reality is that colorblindness is kind of a form of racism and white exceptionalism for those of us that are white. It can come across as being rather white, that we're going to say we're going to be, you know, we're one of the good ones, so we're just going to treat everybody without reference to their color or differences, and that we're just going to not see them. And it's not good. And research shows that people that try to practice color blindness come across more cold, less helpful, and not very sincere because they're, I guess, trying to withhold, or they're probably not comfortable with talking to people that look different from them. Okay, so you all got it right. I mean, it's not, the practice should be we should treat everybody with equality and equity, which are two different terms, but we should also embrace who they are. Our lens should see in full color.
But we also can't be too perfect, because being too perfect makes it so we don't take chances and find our fallibilities. Years ago, I use a word my wife corrected me, fortunately. I used to think you could Jew someone down in a price on something. Now, I didn't know, I thought it was actually working it down or kind of bringing down I didn't know Jew was Jewish and the history of what that meant. I was ignorant. My wife fortunately told me what I did, and thank her very much. Anyway, we have a lot of ignorance that is kind of baked into us. So we probably need to look at ourselves a lot. But if we don't say something and people willing to tell us when we're screwing up, we still have to take chances and find out where our blind spots are.
Correct. Yeah, well said. Fred, why don't you take them off into the next discussion?
Bobby has a comment, Greg.
Bobby?
Not a comment, but just for what you've been saying, this is one of my favorite memes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Equality versus equity.
Yep. I actually have that same one.
Yeah, I have too.
And it's problematic because white or colorblindness is mostly a white perspective. It fosters white supremacy and it allows us to ignore racism in American life. If we can't see it because we said we're not going to see it, we can't fix it. We can't help become part of the solution if you're going to say, well, I just treat everybody the same. It removes the uncomfortableness in race discussions, right? And how would you like it? Let's flip it around for a minute. Keep your whiteness, but what if people looked at you and ignored something really special about you, about your heritage, your culture, your skin? How would it make you feel? And I think I want a police officer who pulls over someone and realizes, oh, look, it's a black family, to have the awareness of the fact they're a black family. They probably have been stopped by the police a lot, perhaps, to think about how he's going to approach them and be recognizing that maybe they're going to have a different experience than if it was a white family. They're seeing in full color and they are operating with full color. They don't treat them any differently. The spirit is still true, but you need to recognize who they are. Why wouldn't you? But I'm just tickled that in our poll, it came out nice and strong.
I don't know if at this point you can treat them you might need to treat them differently because they might be wounded. And as my wife tells me, I'm a large white man. And when I come up to a woman, she's not going to necessarily know that I'm safe to be around just first. So she's got a history of being fearful. So I might first say, I mean no harm. Or so by just doing that, you're treating them differently than you're treating a white person, because a white person already knows that you probably don't mean them any harm.
Not necessarily.
Well, this is true because you're right, because we're not in a perfect world.
Right. Let me throw a set of questions in the breakout room.
Jackie's got a great meme here. Yeah, I love that one too, Jackie.
Yeah, that's a good one, Jackie. I've seen that too. That's nice.
I'd like to add something.
What was that?
Yeah, I didn't see it.
I will bring that up and send that out to everyone. It's the tallness of ladders when you're pruning a tree.
It shows the difference in equality, inequality, equity, and justice.
Right.
And, the reason I don't like the other picture is that the people are not the same size. So it looks like something's wrong with one of the people.
Oh,
When
yeah.
it is not something that's wrong with the person, it's the condition that the person is in. That's why I prefer not to use that other one.
Mhm.
That one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah, the one Jackie has nice. It's nicer.
So where's the one that Jackie has?
I think Lori's going to send it out or reference it or something.
I'll see if I